Hi, how is everyone? How are you doing? Hello, thanks for joining. My name is Naomi Judge. I'm a naturopath and clinical nutritionist. And today I'm going to be talking about your hormones. In particularly, I'm going to be talking about estrogen dominance and its connection to histamine, its connection to allergies, and why you might actually be experiencing food sensitivities, allergies, rashes, that kind of thing sometimes, and then other times you're fine. And what I find is clients of mine say that they just find it so difficult to identify food sensitivities because it's not every day. It's not all the time. They don't eat one food and then they have the allergy to it or the reaction to it. They might eat these foods sporadically and then one time they react to it, another time they don't react to it. So what I wanted to do is I just wanted to kind of help you understand what could be going on with your hormones. And we're going to focus in on estrogen a little bit here because estrogen is really one of the main hormones that affects neurotransmitters. It affects, neurotransmitters like GABA, glutamate, histamine, and this can affect how you react to foods. And the issue here is some of the healthy foods can cause problems. So for instance, a GAPS diet is a diet that you don't have histamine or high glutamate foods in, and this helps to reduce histamine and this helps to reduce your sensitivities. But sometimes people find it difficult to do that long term, so you can actually kind of do like a mini GAPS diet if your flare-ups aren't as often. If your flare-ups aren't everyday flare-ups. And of course, if you've got estrogen dominant conditions like endometriosis, you might be experiencing flare-ups more regularly. So with estrogen changes through your cycle. So most women will experience the day 14, which is mid-cycle, the estrogen elevates. And as estrogen elevates, it will change all the other factors that are going on. And then after it elevates and you get into the luteal phase before your period, it starts to go in a downward turn. So when your estrogen is elevating, you might find that you have more issues with histamine, you might have more issues with glutamate, because estrogen is actually changing a couple of different things. Estrogen changes the way your immune system reacts. So your immune system is sort of a seesaw from having an immune system that fights cold and flu, fights bacteria, fights fungi, to having an immune system that's way overreactive, and you get kind of autoimmune conditions and flare-ups from Crohn's, from rheumatoid to Hashimoto's to Graves'. So it's kind of this seesaw. You'll actually find that during pregnancy, when you become Th2 dominant, your estrogen is high during pregnancy, especially estriol, that's high during pregnancy. And what you will find is, or what I have found and what clients of mine have found, is during pregnancy their autoimmune symptoms actually decrease. And this is a lot to do with the hormones, because estrogen is super, super high. Your autoimmune conditions decrease, but you're more susceptible to getting maybe bacterial infections. You might get thrush an awful lot, maybe even candida, or maybe even fungal infections and cold and flus. So you might notice that change with hormones, and particularly that change when you get pregnant. So when you're pregnant and when the estrogen is high, you're more estrogen dominant, you might get more things like rhinitis, you might get more things like sinus problems, itchiness, hay fever, eczema. You might also get allergies, and you might get like a tight chest or like an itchy mouth, that kind of thing. Hives is another thing. And along with that, there are also other conditions that can be experienced, such as chronic fatigue syndrome, and there is a connection with autism with this estrogen dominant kind of picture, and a really elevated immune system, super high immune system due to the estrogen dominance. So there are a few areas to investigate and a few areas that are connected to this immune system variance, and also this estrogen dominance. So what you might find is during this cycle, during this estrogen dominant cycle, neurotransmitters like GABA is a calming inhibitory transmitter. If you're low in GABA, you're more likely to get an anxious body, a tense body, a tight chest, heart palpitations, tense muscles. You know, you just can't sleep because you're sort of feeling like this. That's the low GABA. Now, what estrogen does is it can actually suppress GABA. Now, what progesterone does is progesterone can potentiate GABA. So if you're more on the kind of estrogen dominant side and you're more on the low progesterone side, what you're going to find is during this time, you're more susceptible to foods, to anxiety, to food sensitivities. During this time as well, there is an excitatory neurotransmitter called glutamate. Now, glutamate is in foods. Glutamate is in eggplants, it's in tomatoes, it's in MSG, monosodium glutamate, which is in takeaway foods, some Thai foods, some Indian, some Chinese foods, that kind of thing, to give it the salty taste. Now, if you're estrogen dominant or you're mid-cycle and your estrogen is peaking, and you've got higher estrogen than you normally have, and your glutamate levels are higher, when you have this food with the natural glutamates in, you're more likely to react to it. So you're more likely to maybe once a month have Chinese food or have something with glutamate in and get that rash, or get the wheezing, get the asthma, get the fatigue, get the extreme thirst, or maybe the insomnia. Now, what happens to me? Hi, Simone, thanks for joining. What happens to me when I have high MSG foods and I'm in that kind of mid-cycle phase is the insomnia. So what will happen to me is I won't be able to get to sleep and I'll have that extreme thirst. Now, this doesn't happen to me every single time. And I noticed this actually from that salt. I went around to someone's house and I didn't know that it had MSG in. So I didn't know. So it wasn't psychosomatic. I didn't know. And they made a meal with that Vegetal, you know, that Vegetal salt from the supermarket. And I didn't know what it was at the time. But I was just up all night. I was so thirsty. You know that thirst where you just can't get enough water? You're just drinking liters and liters of water and you just can't get enough water. I was like that practically all night and wired, like, and I thought, what is it? So I called them and I said, can you just go through what you've put in the food? And it was that Vegetal salt. So just be aware that it does have MSG in. But that was when I was mid-cycle. But it doesn't affect me like that all the time. It's only when my estrogen is higher, I'm naturally sensitive to the glutamate, and the progesterone might be a little bit lower because I am sort of known to have my progesterone that does go a little bit lower. Now, another thing that happens with estrogen dominance, and this is why endometriosis and estrogen dominant conditions are, one, connected to the immune system, two, they're also connected to autoimmune, but three, you kind of get a myriad of conditions all together. So for example, when you've got estrogen dominance, it actually causes more mast cell production. Mast cells are an immune cell and they're found on the skin, they're found in the lungs, they're found on mucous membranes, they're found in the mouth, the sinus cavity, thinking all the mucous membranes that you've got, and the GIT tract. So when you've got elevated estrogen and you've got elevated mast cells, because your estrogen's elevated, you're more likely to, say, react to foods digestively. So you'll have some foods and you might react to them more, particularly those high histamine foods. High histamine coupled with high estrogen and that excessive mast cell production will cause those really acute allergy symptoms. So either the wheezing, the itchy roof of the mouth, the sneezing straight away, the red runny nose, that kind of thing. So that can also happen with the high estrogen. And now remember that some people are estrogen dominant all the way through their cycles. Some women are just estrogen dominant that kind of mid-cycle when you ovulate. So you're more prone to reacting to these foods. And definitely with histamine. So the issue with histamine is it's kind of a vicious circle. Histamine reacts to estrogen and produces more estrogen, and estrogen creates more histamine. Now, histamine is a neurotransmitter. It's got so many different functions, from kind of giving us energy, making us clear, but also histamine will get hives, we'll get rashes, we'll get anxious from too much histamine. We might get tremors, and also muscle cramps, also sweating from high histamine. And excess estrogen can cause this histamine to actually elevate in our body. So then if you have foods when you've got high estrogen, if you have foods with lots of histamine in, and I'm trying to think of healthy foods here. So some people react to, say, sauerkraut. Some people react to probiotics because these are actually elevating your histamine levels. So it's about, if you've got that high estrogen, it's just about being aware of these different times in your cycles and the foods that can actually you'll react to and be sensitive to. Now, this can also happen in menopause. Now, just because you're going through menopause, it doesn't mean that you're not estrogen dominant. In fact, a lot of women that go through menopause actually become estrogen dominant in a different estrogen, and that's estrone. And this is where this hive, so a lot of women that go through menopause get this kind of hivey rash on their skin, an itchy rash. Sometimes they can't even feel it. And that can be that histamine reaction as well. So even if you're going through menopause, it doesn't mean that you're not going to have this reaction. Now, another thing that's very interesting is that estrogen as well will initiate more of an IgG response in your body. IgG is an immune globulin that's an immune cell, immune response. And when we do food intolerance tests, we check in the blood your immune response to those foods. So you might have, say, immune test, and it shows gluten, or it shows wheat, it shows eggs, it shows all of these foods. And what can actually cause that to affect more can be your elevated estrogen. So in a sense, your elevated estrogen can also cause you to react to foods more when you've got high estrogen that you wouldn't, that you're a little bit sensitive to. So wheat, for example, a lot of people might be sensitive to wheat, and you've had a food intolerance test, and you have your IgG, and the IgG says you're high in wheat. But other times in your cycle, you might not react to wheat, but yet you react to it when your estrogen's higher, or you react to it if you've got conditions like endometriosis. And the same goes for when you get tested. If you get tested when you in your cycle, depending on whether your estrogen's at rock bottom or your estrogen's high, this can affect how your body is, your blood that's been taken can react. So it's good to know this. It's good to know that estrogen changes the way your immune system reacts. It changes the balance of your immune system for this Th1, Th2 dominant. So either you're more reactive to autoimmune responses, and underreactive, and you don't get coughs and colds. You know, if you're someone that hasn't had flu or a cold for 2 years, yet you get lots of aches and pains, and you might have more an autoimmune kind of response to things. So that can maybe show that you may be a little bit autoimmune dominant, and you might be also estrogen dominant. So it's just good to know this, because it helps you to understand the connection between your immune system, the connection between allergies, and then how you can actually play out your food as well. So an example I'll give you is, one was the MSG I had, but also I used to react a little bit to, say, red wine, or I remember having Campari once. And my whole body just came out in hives, like awful hives. This was mid-cycle, and if I had a drink of red wine mid-cycle, my whole face would flush up, but yet during my period it would be fine. So and it's interesting, a couple of years ago I didn't make the connection. I just thought it was my immune system, and I wasn't looking at that connection with my cycle. And it was when I was delving deep more into it for clients that I saw that connection with the histamine, with the allergies, and the estrogen dominance. So you can see how hormones will affect this. Now, foods, I had to write this down because I can never remember all the foods. So I did write this down. So foods that you actually do need to be careful with, and foods that are kind of high in histamine, high in glutamate, your flavors, your tomatoes, obviously. But one thing I wanted to talk about was bone broth, because bone broth is a healthy food. But what you might find is, again, during your estrogen dominant times in your cycle, you might find you react to bone broth, or you might find it's not as great. So all you need to do is track your cycle and just make sure that during that kind of peak ovulation where your estrogen's highest, if you know you react to foods, you keep the main reactors out, which can be your fermented foods, fermented aged cheeses. What else have I got here? It's the vegetables I wanted to talk about. Pickled foods, kombucha, beer, alcohol, champagne. A lot of people react to champagne, don't they? That's it, eggplant and spinach and tomatoes. So eggplant, spinach and tomatoes do contain kind of natural glutamate, and they're histamine as well. And eggplants, I found for me, if I have eggplants at a certain time in my cycle, I get that itchiness on the roof of my mouth as well. So all just these little symptoms. So what my advice would be, if you know you react strongly to foods, if you get those rashes or you get food intolerances and you can't identify it, actually just start to track it through your cycle. You know, day 1 being the first day of your bleed, track it through the cycle and actually see if you're seeing patterns of when you do react. And the thing is, your cycle will also change what you want to do anyway. Sometimes during your cycle, you might want to eat junk food. Sometimes during your cycle, you might want to eat healthier food. Sometimes during your cycle, you might crave alcohol. Sometimes during your cycle, you might not want to drink alcohol. Same goes with coffee. There will be days, particularly when your estrogen's at its highest and you're feeling a bit more alert and maybe a bit more some people get a bit anxious. You may not feel like coffee, yet when you've got your period and you're very tired, you may want more coffee. Reacting to alcohol. So it does depend what kind of alcohol, but if you've got, there are a couple of different things that can go on with alcohol. So 1, we've got the yeast in alcohol. 2, we've got the histamine in alcohol. So the yeast can react at any time, particularly when candida is high. So if you get candida issues during your cycle, and some women do get candida issues during their period, that's why you might react to some alcohol, because if you've got candida, you will react to alcohol. If it is actually more of that red flushing and it's more of estrogen mid-cycle, it could be that during that time your progesterone is actually dropping out a lot. So progesterone will actually help support GABA, which we want because that's calming. Progesterone will also help support your immune system, so you don't get too, your immune system doesn't switch on too much. So what I would say, if it's alcohol during period or just before, we know that during the period, just that couple of days before is when progesterone is dropping out. So if yours is dropping out too much, that's why you might be reacting. But if you are reacting, it's definitely that connection between hormones and the immune system and what they're doing as well. But also bear in mind candida as well, because that can cause an effect, particularly if it's like wine or beer or anything like that. Yeah, you would react. Interesting to know as well that we want to break down histamine. Yes, so if it's migraines and you're reacting, so we know that progesterone dropping out will cause, so the hormones dropping out will cause the migraines, but there is another connection to the migraines with the histamine. So histamine, those people that do get elevated histamine do get more pain and migraines. That is a symptom. So it would be interesting to look at your histamine levels and if that's an issue. You want things that kind of break down the histamine. So sprouts break down the histamine, olive oil breaks down the histamine, probiotics that aren't histamine producing. There's only 2 really good ones. Lactobacilli rhamnosus and Lactobacilli plantarum, they break down histamine. A lot of probiotics create histamine. So if you were to get a broad spectrum probiotic, they would have lactic acid producing casei, C-A-S-E-I, lactobacilli. That creates histamine. The same with fermented things. So what you might want to do during that time is go super low histamine, and just see if that makes a difference to your migraines. And just olive oil and sprouts to help break down, and also some DOA. Some people take DOA actually in a supplement form to break down histamine. Just another caveat on that is green tea. Green tea actually prevents the breakdown of histamine, so you just want to be careful if you're drinking a lot of green tea. If you know during that period, a couple of days before your period and during your period, you get migraines, you react to foods, you react to alcohol, I would do like a mini GAPS diet during that time. So I would just have some light protein, like some fish or some good quality. Oh, hi Lucy, I see that. In 1 second. A good quality protein, some fish. Really low reactive fruits, fruits and vegetables, rice, quinoa, yam, maybe, what are the low reactives? Courgette, carrots, parsnip, that kind of thing. And actually have a super plain diet for maybe about 5 days. That should be enough to actually help your symptoms. That should help your symptoms. And of course, if there's other hormonal issues going on, you want to help those. But that's in terms of just trying to help acutely where you can, Simone. Supplements, rutin and quercetin, do they help with... Yep, so both of those would help with... like an anti-inflammatory response. So any of the bioflavonoids are great for allergies, and bioflavonoids would work, Lucy, at helping at reducing the mast cell production in the mucous membranes, on the chest, that kind of thing. So yes, they do help, particularly with that mast cell production. So any bioflavonoids you can supplement, you can get natural ones. Bioflavonoids like rutin are in the pith of oranges as well, the white stuff, they're high in those, so they do help. They help you also to absorb vitamin C as well, so that vitamin C again will help with the immune system and helps to balance out the immune system as well, and helps with the mast, just regulating the mast cell production. So the probiotics, Louise, hi, how are you? The probiotics that help are your Lactobacilli plantarum and Lactobacilli rhamnosus. So those are the two best ones to break down. They're not histamine producing. They don't produce histamine. Some do, but plantarum and rhamnosus. I always pronounce it rhamnosus, but I don't always go over all the pronunciations. I probably should. So those are the two. So that's why just be careful with your fermented foods. Even be careful with kombucha and things like that during when you know you're at kind of your height. When you know you are, because you'll see the cycle. Look at your cycle and look when you're going in and out of this allergy flare up. And allergies are related to anxiety. Okay, there is that connection. So high histamine will cause anxiety. High histamine is a neurotransmitter that will cause allergies, and that will cause anxiety as well. High glutamate will cause anxiety and also will cause allergies. So you can see here now there's a connection between estrogen dominance, there's a connection between anxiety, and there's a connection between the immune system and also those and allergies. So you can see that trio, and a lot of people will have that trio. You might have endometriosis and be sensitive to a lot of foods and also have the anxiety. So you can see the trio there. So in terms of just helping, in terms of going from here, during that period of time, stick to a really plain, low histamine diet, low glutamate. Try and have low histamine foods. If you're having lots of bone broth and fermented foods, just have a break for 5 days from all of this, and that should help during the 5 days reduce the mast cells, reduce the histamine, and reduce your reaction. But track first and see when your peak kind of inflammatory days are, and then you'll be able to go from there. I hope that helped. I was just trying to think if I missed anything. I was just looking on the foods on here if there was any foods that I think that's it. I talked about the green tea, using olive oil and using sprouts as well to break down histamine. So I hope that helped. That was kind of a very brief overview. I'm going to go into some of those a little bit more. I'm going to talk about estrogen and the immune system a whole lot more, because I see this as a biggie, and we can actually go into this further, and it's quite an interesting area to explore more of. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that was helpful. Please pop below if you've got any questions about your allergies, their connection to histamine, glutamate GABA, and estrogen dominance and your hormones. So enjoy the rest of your day, guys, and I will see you next week. Bye.